Witness. Hello and welcome to Liam's Lyceum. I am your host Liam, aka Hembar, and today I'll be doing a spoiler-free review of Steven Erikson's House of Chains. House of Chains is a 2002 novel by Steven Erikson in Book 4 and Malazan Book of the Fallen. I have previously done reviews for the first 3 books, and so this may contain some spoilers for those, but will avoid spoilers for this book. So we start with the prologue, which shows us a man being shorned, which is, something that, it is exactly what it sounds like, but it is also a form of exile. And it's ritualistic, just where the hair is cut and you're made permanently bald. And then part 1 starts us with the tale of Karsa Orlong. He has a quest to redeem his people by attacking those at Silver Lake. He is a Conan-like figure, a barbarian that relies on the strength of his arm and his will. He definitely comes off to me as ironic, like someone who has read too much Anglo-Saxon poetry, if you get that reference. But he's also bloody amazing at killing and conquering, and, apparently sex too, or something like that. This part does a great job, as always, really, to immerse you. There's this vibrant and often terrifying world that you are, seeing firsthand, so to speak. It also brings to life history that I think the best of fantasy and sci-fi do. It's that sense of verisimilitude. And there are obvious signs of age and change, especially at the beginning when the connection to the larger world of Malazan seems interestingly distant. Karsa Orlong himself is a Teblor of the Urid tribe on Genebakis. The Teblor live very long, and at 80, he is still considered very young. The timeline is actually off at the beginning of this, as Karsa actually seems rather relevant to Deadhouse Gates, and this first part of the novel takes place around the time of Gardens of the Moon. His section has to do with his heritage. It's something he'll come to understand. His gods and society are not what he thinks. One thing interesting is just how large Karsa is, and what he will call children, and what they actually are. So part 2 brings us to a time and place after the end of Deadhouse Gates, in Erin. Adjunct Devor has taken command of Coltane's chain of dogs has, made it, but Coltane has not survived, of course. Now we also come back to Crocus, now called Cutter, and Apsalar as well, and with their dealings with the Shadow Throne and Cotillion. Fiddler also has a new name. Felison is someone I really didn't like all that much in Deadhouse Gates, though I did pity her, of course. But gosh, her pairing with her sister Tavor is only one of the great pairings in this novel. But I can just say bluntly that I felt a lot more pity for her character this time around. We do get more races, such as the Fulcral Assail, again the Teblor, the Talanamas, again, and the Jaggets, so forth. There are Tistleosin, which are related to the Andi and Adur, but they're basically like your typical High Elves when compared, if you were to compare the Andi to Drow, for example. So this is a journey from naivety to, and arrogance to a more and more humble place, rather. It's very symbolic, I think, but not very heavy-handed. It also shows the downfall of the opposite of Karsa, which is arrogance and knowledge. So there's also the idea of what it seems to be a god, and there needs to be compassion and an easing of burdens, maybe, right? So this idea of what makes a being a god is definitely interesting. Now, of course, this is in a world where these gods are very human. They're very Greek in that aspect. They're not very Christian at all, I would say. Many religions, they're not very comparable to a lot of gods in the real world. Anyway, so there's also a lot of irony, and it's quite funny at times, actually, and the wits is quite remarkable, honestly. Especially with these comparisons between barbarians and civilization, and the demarcation is rather gray here in the story. There's much moving, much happens. It's a great book, honestly, from the first to last page, and you have such a vast picture of all the moving parts, which is, the way I like my worlds, and those parts matter in epic fantasy, or they should, rather. All right, so Erikson continues to subvert fantasy tropes, while others do it. It's easier to do to change something, that you already know, right? So like Beethoven with classical style, right, into a more romantic style. And Erikson doesn't just mess with one thing; he messes with the hero's journey as a whole, the concept of good versus evil, plot structure, obviously, and of course he adds an insane amount of depth to his world building, but not with a bunch of exposition, I'd say. Anyways, the epilogue is about a story, and it seems that story might be that of Midnight Tides, and I would say it probably is, since I've now read Midnight Tides. So that book follows House of Chains, but it actually takes place before House of Chains as well. So, and it's on a different continent with different characters. But this left me wondering and thinking at the end, which is a good sign, I think. I do that with authors like Gene Wolfe and Erikson, of course, and a few others on occasion. The best books don't only show character development with those in the world, but they give you a reason to develop your own character and to reflect on yourself. Of course, the escapism is fine, cool, and that's, I would say, maybe one of the main reason I read, right? I mean, I want to be entertained, which I think some like literary fiction doesn't do very well. But I love that this book entertains, but also makes me think, and not just one, right? It's strong because it does both. And the dialogue, of course, is great as always. There's much action as well in this one. And it definitely does not follow the same plot as the first books. And here's just one quote to end this on. To feel nothing is not a virtue. I'll catch you next time.